to the court.
As I just said, my name is Blake Wards, and I've been a senior investigator for the DHPD for 10 years.
And as a senior investigator, what does your job entail?
Although the department is required to
Can you speak up a little and slower? A
Um,
little difficulty understanding.
although the department isn't required to do investigations, we like to give people the benefit of the doubt. So we investigate people who claim that they have the privilege to an apartment after the original tenant has died.
And what kind of thing do you investigate when you're investigating such a claim?
Well, we first like to see if the tenants have a direct familial relationship, and to see if the new tenant had made that apartment the primary residence for at least 2 years.
At this point, Your Honor, may I approach the witness with what has been marked for identification as Respondent's Exhibit Q, and I direct opposing counsel's attention to the similarly marked document in the trial tendered to you at the start of the trial.
You may.
Would you please identify this document for the court?
These are the Gotham rules and regulations outlining who has privilege to the apartment.
And what proof must DHPD gather prior to making its determination on who will have the privilege of succeeding a rent-controlled apartment?
We like to look at two things. We like to see if the tenant, if the petitioner, or any person particularly fits into a category of the approved list, and that includes parents, grandparents, children, etc. And if they don't fit into that category, we look into the second one.
I want to bring your attention back to this document, the rules and regulations. Are you required to follow these rules and regulations?
No.
You are not required to follow these rules?
Yes, I'm sorry.
What burden is the DHPD under to prove that someone has the privilege of succeeding another in a rent-controlled apartment?
The DHPD isn't required to gather any information that is petitioner's shop to provide proof that they had a direct relationship and a proof of primary residence in it.
Your Honor, at this time, we respectfully request that this document be moved into evidence.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
It's submitted into evidence.
Thank you, Your Honor. May I retrieve the document?
Yes, please.
And at this time, Your Honor, may I approach the witness with what has been moved into evidence as Petitioner's Exhibit 15.
Yes, you may.
Thank you. Have you seen this document before?
I have seen documents like this. It's a standard form of DHPD. However, I've not seen this particular document.
Would you please turn your attention to the top of the form? What is it the petitioner must do with this document?
They need to submit it to DHPD.
If it were served on you, now that you've seen it, would it have made any difference in the outcome of DHPD's decision?
No, and even if it was submitted to the DHP, it would have not been binding to DHP whatsoever.
What are some of the things that you look for when determining a familial relationship?
As I said previously, when
Can you start over with your answer?
as I said previously, when I confuse documents, we look into two categories. The first, or two lists.
Your Honor, the document speaks for itself. Right now, all she's doing is remarking on what the document already says.
Overruled.
We look at the approved list, and the list includes parents, grandchildren, and so on. And if the person does not fit into those categories, we look into the second one.
Does the petitioner meet the requirements for the traditional family?
Objection calls for conclusion.
Your Honor, may I be heard?
Yes.
The witness works for DHPD and is familiar with these investigations and the regulations and requirements needed for a claimant in order to meet their burden of proof.
May I be heard?
Yes.
Your Honor, this is speculation. This witness is not an expert and therefore cannot give this opinion.
I am going to overrule your objection.
Do you want me to restate the question?
Yes, please.
Does the petitioner meet the requirements for the traditional family?
No.
What do you do when they don't meet their requirements for the traditional family?
Well, we look at the 7 category to see if they fit that.
Before you go through this list, how difficult is it to understand the requirements stated?
It's not hard at all. It's in simple language, so anyone can understand it.
Turning your attention to the second familial category, the first requirement for meeting the criteria is longevity of the relationship. How long did the relationship between the petitioner and Ms. Stone exist?
For only 2 years.
The next category has to do with relying on one another for payment of rent and household expenses. What evidence did the petitioner submit to DHPD that he and his great aunt relied on one another in this regard?
No
Objection,
evidence.
this calls for hearsay. There's no way that this investigator could have known this, as the investigator never has actually even met my client or his great aunt, and therefore the only way that this investigator could know this is through hearsay.
Your Honor.
She can testify as to what was received, and I think that's what was asked.
Yes.
Overruled.
Can you repeat your answer?
No evidence.
The next requirement has to do with the intermingling of finances. What evidence did the petitioner submit to DHPD that he and his great aunt had a shared bank account or something of that sort?
Again, no evidence.
The next category has to do with attending family functions together and holding themselves out as family members. What evidence did the petitioner submit to DHPD that he and his great aunts attended events together?
Again, no evidence.
The next involves formalized legal obligations to one another. What evidence did the petitioner submit to DHPD that he was the executor of his great aunt's will?
No evidence.
That he held power of attorney over her?
Again, no evidence.
That he was named as her health care proxy?
Objection to this entire line of questioning. Again, this case is about whether or not the DHPD acted arbitrarily and capriciously in making their decision, and whether this decision had a rational basis, not the actions of my client.
Your Honor.
Overruled.
The following piece of criteria that is relied upon is whether or not the petitioner and his great aunt relied upon one another for daily services. What evidence did the petitioner submit to DHPD that he and his great aunt helped each other through daily needs?
Again, no evidence.
The last category has to do with anything extra that might show a deep, long-term, emotionally committed relationship. What additional evidence did the petitioner submit to DHPD that could have proved this type of relationship?
The petitioner did not submit any evidence of this.
Whose name is on the lease for, oh, Your Honor, may I retrieve the document?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, whose name is on the lease for apartment number 110 at 12634 West Huron Street in Gotham, Nirvana?
Ms. Barbara Stone, and she's been registered for that apartment for 50 years.
And who owns this building?
The building is owned by the city of Gotham, but it's administered by the DHPD.
What did you do as the next part of your investigation?
Well, I conducted several interviews with people, more specifically a neighbor, Finley Adams, Ms. Stone's nurse, Rivers Evans, and the petitioner's probation officer, Kate Neal.
What did you learn from Miss Ebb?
I learned that the petitioner was never home or rarely home, and that they would get into nasty arguments.
What were the fights usually about?
The fights-
Objection, this calls for hearsay upon hearsay. This investigator never spoke with my client or my client's great aunt or heard these fights, so this is in fact what someone else is reporting to this investigator, and that someone else heard this from my client and his great aunt.
Your Honor, may I be heard?
Yes.
Administrative agencies in New York are allowed to consider hearsay when coming to their decision. Therefore, this testimony is being admitted to show that the agency had a rational basis when coming to its decision and is not being put forward to prove the veracity of the actual statement.
Your Honor,
Yes.
we're at trial today, we're at a hearing today. We're not making the decision for the DHPD about whether or not Harley Davidson has the right to the apartment. That is for a hearing that may or may not be set for a later date.
You can redirect, you can cross-examine the witness on what she testifies to. You'll be given an opportunity, full and fair, at that time.
So what were these fights about?
The fights are usually about the petitioner never being home or about borrowing money.
And what did Finley Adams tell you about the petitioner?
He wasn't very cooperative, but he did tell me that the petitioner was rarely home.
And what did you learn from your interview with Officer Tatum Neal?
Objection calls for hearsay.
Your Honor, may I be heard?
Yes.
Again, this trial, we are here today to prove that the DHPD did not act arbitrarily or capriciously, and that they acted under what their requirements were. And considering that when they came to their decision, they were allowed to consider hearsay, this is relevant to the case.
Overruled.
What did you learn from Tatum Neal?
Well, he told me that the petitioner stayed at a different address from the Stones, and that mail was
Your
delivered to
Honor, I believe we're out of time.
Yes, so that's it.
Okay, thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Yes,
Cross, Your Honor?
yes, please.
Now, Ms. Wards, isn't it true that you were the lead investigator for the Department of Housing, Preservation and Development, or the DHPD?
Yes.
And you've testified that you carry out an investigation whenever someone makes a claim that they're entitled to a lease on a rent-controlled apartment in the city of Gotham, isn't that right?
The department likes to give people the benefit of the doubt, so yeah.
And when you finish your investigation, you turn in a report to your executive director, Peggy Cho, isn't that right?
Yes.
Now, it's true that you became familiar with my client's claim when you received 3 documents. A letter dated May 26, 2018, a copy of the former tenant's death certificate, and the former tenant, or my client's great aunt's, notice of family members who potentially had succession rights. Those are the 3 documents that you received, isn't that right?
Yes.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness with these 3 documents? These are Petitioner's Exhibits 11, 12, and 15.
Yes, you may.
Now, this is what you got that caused you to start your investigation. These 3 documents, correct?
Yes.
Your Honor, may I retrieve the documents?
Yes.
Now, to your knowledge, did you or anyone else from the DHPD ask my client for any additional information or documentation?
The department isn't required to ask for information. It is up to the petitioner to provide information to the DHPD.
Your Honor, move to strike that answer as non-responsive. My question was whether or not anyone else from the DHPD asked my client for any additional information or documentation, not the policy of the DHPD regarding this.
Granted.
So please answer with a yes or no. So to your knowledge, did you or anyone else from the DHPD ask my client for any additional information or documentation?
They aren't required, no.
Your Honor, move to strike everything before the no as non-responsive.
Granted.
Now, when you carried out your investigation, you went to see people who you thought might provide evidence that my client was not entitled to a lease on the apartment in question. Isn't that right?
Yes.
So you interviewed my client's probation officer, an elderly tenant in the same building as my client, and my client's great aunt's nurse. Isn't that right?
Yes.
Who did you interview first?
I don't recall.
You don't recall who you interviewed first?
No.
So, but during the course of your carrying out this investigation, you never talked to my client, did you?
No, I did not.
And you never wrote to my client either.
I wasn't required to speak to him, so no.
So that's a no. Your Honor, move to strike everything prior to the no as non-responsive. Again, I did not ask about the DHPD policy.
Correct.
Now, you never emailed my client?
No.
Did you text him maybe?
No.
Connect with him on Facebook?
No.
So, you never communicated with my client in any shape, manner, or form, ever?
I didn't need to, so no.
Your Honor, move to strike. Everything before the no is non-responsive.
Granted.
And it's true, isn't it, that you did not interview him because you thought that he would lie to you? Isn't that right?
No.
And now you never interviewed my client's fiance either, in any shape, manner, or form.
I didn't feel the need to interview the petitioner's fiance.
Is that a no?
No.
Your Honor, move to strike the previous answer as non-responsive.
Granted.
Now, you did that because you also believed that she would be lying, isn't that right?
Objection, speculation.
Your Honor, this whole case is about whether or not the decision made by the DHPD was arbitrary and capricious, and whether or not there was a rational decision-making process. So the decision-making process of this investigator is central to this case as a fact, not speculation.
Overruled.
Would you like me to repeat the question?
Yes, please.
So you never interviewed my client's fiance, Sage Wisner, because you thought that she would be lying. Isn't that right?
More so that I didn't feel the need to interview her.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness with what has been marked for identification as Petitioner's Exhibit 4? This is the investigator's affidavit.
Yes.
Can you turn to the last page? Now that's your signature on the bottom, isn't it?
Yes.
And this is your affidavit?
Yes.
And when you made this affidavit, you took an oath, much like you did here in court today, to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Isn't that right?
Yes.
Now, can you turn to page 70, paragraph 8, and this would be lines 6 through 8, where it says, I didn't bother contacting Davison's so-called fiance because in my experience, people just lie. Do you see that line?
I do.
So, and those are your words, aren't they?
Yes.
So I'll ask you once again, is it true that you did not interview my client's fiance because you thought that she would lie to you?
Yeah.
Your Honor, may I retrieve the document?
Yes.
Now, you're a former police officer, aren't you?
Yes.
And is it proper police procedure to only interview the witnesses who are favorable to your hypothesis in the case? Is that standard police procedure?
No.
But you did that in this case, didn't you?
I just interviewed several people.
And they happen to be the only witnesses favorable to your hypothesis in this case?
Coincidentally, yes.
Now, subsequent to your investigation, you turned in a report to your executive director, Ms. Cho, isn't that right?
Yes.
Objection, asked and answered.
Your Honor, I previously asked whether or not she reported to Ms. Cho. This is whether or not she turned in this specific report to Ms. Cho.
Overruled.
Would you like me to repeat the question?
Yes, please.
So subsequent to your investigation, you turned in your report to Ms. Cho, isn't that right?
Yes.
And then Ms. Cho issued her letter dated May 16th denying my client the lease for the apartment in question, isn't that right?
Yes.
Now, turning your attention to the interview you conducted of my client's great aunt's nurse, isn't it true that during the interview, this nurse informed you that my client was often not in the apartment?
Yes.
Isn't it true that she also informed you that she was only in the apartment between noon and 2 p.m. every day?
She did.
But isn't it also true that you never asked her how she knew what my client was doing the other 22 hours in the day?
No, she never told me.
And you never asked her?
And I never asked her.
Now, you never asked a single question to the nurse about the familial relationship between my client and her great aunt. Isn't that right?
No.
It's not correct?
Yes, please.
So you also interviewed an elderly neighbor. Isn't that right?
Yes.
And when you did that, even you admitted that you had interviewed him in a pretty confrontational manner. Isn't that right?
I may be a little confrontational at times. Yes.
And you then threatened this neighbor. Isn't that correct?
I did not threaten him.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness with what has been marked for identification as Petitioner's Exhibit 4? Again, this is the affidavit of this investigator.
Which page is that?
Now, can I turn your...
Which page is that?
Oh, sorry, I'm referring to page 71 right now. So, can you turn your attention to page 71? We're looking at paragraph 10, so the paragraph at the top of the page. Isn't it true that you said that you then investigated that client in that page?
Yes.
Okay. Now, now you discounted his testimony based on the fact that he had filed legitimate claims about the condition of his apartment. Isn't that right?
Yes.
And you never asked Finley Adams a single question about the familial relationship between my client and his great aunt either, did you?
I was mainly looking for if the petitioner was at the apartment frequently, or that was his primary residence.
Now, throughout this entire investigation, my client never had an opportunity to refute anything in your report. Isn't that correct? Or question any of the people that you interviewed?
Yes.
And isn't it fair to say that all of your questioning was about how long my client resided in the apartment and whether he continuously resided there?
That is a factor to determine if the petitioner can receive the apartment. So yes.
Objection, Your Honor. Not objection, but Your Honor, I believe the time is up.
With Your Honor's permission, this questioning required several discussions of documents. So, with Your Honor's permission, maybe 3 more questions.
I'll let you have 2 more questions.
Thank you. So, now, in the letter that my client was sent, you stated that my client was denied his application for the apartment because he did not continuously reside there.
Yes.
Now, isn't it true that there's no spot in the entire Gotham City rules and regulations, which you have previously testified that you are extensively familiar with, that indicate that continuous residency is the requirement? Isn't that right?
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor. May I retrieve the document?
Yes, you may.
The respondent's rest, Your
Respondent.
Honor.
Respond, rest?
Yes.
Okay. You can take 10 minutes to modify your closing.
Thank you, Your Honor.
10 minutes for parking meters. Is your parking meter okay?
Yeah, I'm fine. I've got till like 5:48, and it stops at 6, so they're not gonna do it. If they did, I'd fight it.
Yeah. I think I better go find some quarters.
I use a card. Sorry, my debit card.
Oh, okay.
You can use, I don't know if you can on the side streets. I'm on the main road.
Got it. I'm here in the parking lot at the handicap spot.
Yeah, I don't know.